When you think of Fire Emblem units, who comes to mind? The main lords like Marth and Roy? Combat gods like Seth or Sigurd? Cute children who have no right being on a battlefield but circumstances have forced them, and somehow they're directly outclassing and killing dozens of trained adult soldiers? Ludonarrative phrase drop aside, units in Fire Emblem embody a multitude of characteristics, some mechanical and some ephemeral, and few have been given as much praise, derision, discussion, and relative importance as everyone's favorite little bright face through trauma, Nino. Nino is a mage from Fire Emblem 7 The Blazing Blade who can be recruited in the chapter Battle Before Dawn. Mechanically, she is a low-level unit with fairly low stats and decent growth rates who, at a glance, provides relatively little utility to your army as is. She can still deal damage to enemies and gets experience fairly quickly, meaning players who want to train her are rewarded with quick level ups, and a somewhat easy time in doing so. Her strength as a unit is similar to many late-joining training projects, often referred to as ESTs by the community, despite the vagueness and trailing assumptions inherent in such a moniker. Because she joins so late, many players struggle to find an opportunity to level her up, usually because their other trained units are strong enough to defeat most enemies in a single round of combat, often on enemy phase, meaning that in order for Nino to gain experience, she either needs to attack an enemy on her own, which won't result in a kill, get attacked by an enemy, which will often result in her taking significant damage or dying due to her low starting stats, or finish off an enemy who was deliberately left alive by the player, usually because the player deliberately attacked with a weaker or heavier weapon to leave the enemy alive. All of this is very common among late-game training projects. This is not what makes Nino unique. No, what makes Nino unique is what she does before she joins. Fire Emblem is a series in which every game gives you a large number of units. Each of these has their own unique character, style, and motivation, but because there are so many of them, every game often leaves the majority of most units' character development to their support conversations, meaning the only experience every player is guaranteed to have with a unit is their circumstances of joining. Far too often you have a vast array of diverse and interesting characters who fail to show any of that personality to the player because they're never given an opportunity to build their supports. What's different about Nino is that she is seen performing narrative actions and endearing the player to her character several chapters before she even appears on the field. What's more is that her personal story arc directly overlaps with the main lord's quest in regards to Sonia, Zephiel, and the Black Fang. This means she has more plot relevance and more lines of dialogue than almost any other playable character outside of the three main lords, Marcus, Oswin, and maybe Matthew Pentanathos. A late-joining training project mage girl landing in the top 10 playable characters for lines of plot-relevant story dialogue is practically unheard of for most Fire Emblem games, yet Nino got that treatment. More than her gameplay relevance, I would hazard a guess that her plot relevance, and specifically her role in the story as a little girl full of potential who got abused and left to die by the evil team, is what attracts so many players to use her, give her favoritism, level her, and do cathartic gameplay actions like having her finish off Sonia in the bonus chapter just following her joining. The game even does small things to encourage this behavior. Mage is a fantastic class for weaker units, as 1-2 range and attacking on resistance lets Nino attack into most enemies without retaliation while doing reasonable damage at good accuracy. And on top of that, the next main chapter after Nino joins, Cog of Destiny, you get a guiding ring dropping off one of the enemies, perfect for promoting her even if you didn't save a guiding ring or earth seal from a previous map. But despite all of that gameplay focus, it wouldn't be enough without story impact to make Nino just as popular as she is. Units like Sophia can find her own guiding ring, or units like Path of Radiance Tormod have a personal skill giving +2 movement. These are equivalent, if not better, gameplay hooks, but neither of these units are nearly as popular as Nino. Part of this is because of their other gameplay struggles, they're harder to train or provide less payoff or the like, but another part is just that they have far less fanfare building up to their joining. Oddly enough, the closest we've gotten to another Nino-type character in Fire Emblem is Hortensia, an obvious nod to the archetype in a game full of obvious archetypal references. She bounces between cackling villain and insecure child with a spot of mind control in the middle, before eventually joining your party with a unique class, relevant skills, and a decent stat spread, and at a time when Master Seals are no longer at a premium, and the number of characters joining each map has begun to slow down, while the number of deployment slots the player has authority over has begun to increase. Honestly, the biggest mark against her is that she joins your army between chapters, so she's sent to the bottom of your deployment roster, unlike most other units who join mid-map and then land at the top of your order. This means that several players might just forget she even joined you in the first place. That said, Hortensia does work a bit differently as a late-game staff user and not a traditional training project mage, so she doesn't really need the dedicated leveling to become a valuable part of your army. So it's not a perfect comparison to Nino. But it is an example of taking a character with relevance to the story and giving them a narrative lead-up and showing off who they are before making them a playable unit, which lets players decide if they like the character first before they have to use them in order to gain their supports. Another example of a character that the story highlights before joining is Larachel and her troop. She doesn't come in nearly as late as Nino, but even as early as Chapter 4 she's still showing up, gallivanting across the countryside wherever monsters appear, and making her joining your army a foregone conclusion, and her eventual plot relevance later on much less of a shock than, say, Joshua's from the same game. Late joining training projects are hard to do right. There are a lot of factors involved in making them relevant enough to gameplay to not be completely overlooked, but don't forget the power of leveraging the story itself to highlight your characters before they join, in more than just a start of chapter highlight, to hook players and get them interested in learning more and using them for the fiction, maybe even more than the gameplay. Thank you to Royal Laguzguard member Sal Mellon, and Laguzguard members C2 Peekly, Enigmatic Mr. L, The Big Herman 007, Bro Juderman, NKO Rico, Kumi, Miss Mesmerism, Lakag, and Rela6 for supporting the channel directly. If you want to be part of the conversations that inspire videos like these, a link to the Discord is in the description. And until next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.